Okay, when you think of the Netherlands, you probably picture a powerhouse of innovation, right? Engineering marvels, incredible efficiency. But what if I told you that for the last 6 years, the country has been in a self-imposed lockdown and it has absolutely nothing to do with a virus? Today, we're going to unpack the truly baffling nitrogen crisis that has brought one of the world's most advanced countries to a grinding halt. So the big question is, how is this even possible? I mean, why is a hyper-modern, super densely populated nation suddenly at a complete standstill? Well, the answer, it's a pretty bizarre story of good intentions, legal traps, and, believe it or not, pigeon droppings. All right, to really get a grip on what's happening here, let's first just look at the real-world impact. I'm not kidding when I say the country has been in an effective lockdown for 6 years now, and the consequences, they're just staggering. And this paralysis it's shockingly widespread. We are talking about a complete freeze on new housing construction right when the country is facing a massive housing shortage. Critical projects like, reinforcing the dikes that literally keep the country from flooding, halted. Even green sustainable energy projects are being canceled. It's gotten so extreme that even planning a simple group hike can be prohibited. The entire nation is on pause. So what's the culprit? What's the one thing causing all of this nationwide paralysis? It all comes down to a single element: nitrogen. Now, let's be clear, nitrogen itself isn't the bad guy here. Plants absolutely need it to grow, but, too much of a good thing can be a total disaster. The source material has a great analogy for this. It calls it fast food for nature. When you get a huge overdose of nitrogen, a few tough, hardy plants, think nettles, they just grow incredibly fast, completely crowding out and destroying all the other more delicate, diverse species that you need for a healthy ecosystem. And it doesn't stop there. This nitrogen overdose also makes the soil super acidic. And to give you an idea of just how severe we're talking, one ecologist actually measured the soil in a major nature reserve and found its acidity was similar to cola. Yeah, the soda. Just imagine what that does to the plants and animals trying to live there. And look, this problem didn't just pop up overnight. It's been building for decades. In the 20th century alone, the Netherlands lost an estimated 60% of its biodiversity. 60%. We're talking about birds like the hoopoe and the ortolan bunting, just gone. It was this catastrophic loss that finally pushed the Netherlands and the rest of Europe to create laws to protect what little precious nature was left. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This crisis isn't just about ecology. It's about how the Netherlands took a simple, well-intentioned European rule and managed to build a completely inescapable legal trap for itself. Okay, you gotta follow me on this, because this is where things get truly wild. So, step one. It all starts with a simple EU directive that says nature must not deteriorate. Seems simple enough, right? But then, step two. The Netherlands takes this crucial step and specifically links that vague rule to a hard numerical limit for nitrogen, the critical deposition value. Then to enforce this super specific limit, they build a hyper-precise computer model called Arius. Well, that turned out to be way too strict, so they created a workaround, a permit system called PAS. And then comes the final step. In 2019, a judge strikes down the workaround. And just like that, the whole system snaps back to its most rigid, strictest interpretation. The trap was sprung. And that 2019 court ruling, it created something that can only be described as the pigeon dropping rule. Seriously, it's a standard of strictness that, well, it almost defies belief. So after that ruling, this became the new legal limit for any new nitrogen emissions in an overloaded nature area. 0.005 moles per hectare per year. Okay, what on earth does that number actually mean in the real world? It means this. That number is the calculated nitrogen impact of a single pigeon dropping spread out over a hectare of land over an entire year. Let that sink in. So if your project, a new hospital, a sustainable housing development, even a hiking trail, is calculated by the computer to produce more nitrogen than one single pigeon poop, it gets canceled, period. And if you think that's unbelievable, listen to this. This isn't even a real measurable ecological standard. The source material makes it clear. This is less nitrogen than you can actually measure in the real world. It's just an artifact of the calculation model. The limit doesn't exist because nature would notice it. It exists simply because it's the smallest number the computer program is capable of calculating. So let's just recap.
The entire country is paralyzed by a computer-generated number that's literally equivalent to bird poop? Which leads to the obvious question, how in the world do politicians propose to break this absurd lock?
And this really gets to the core conflict in the political debate right now. On one hand, you have the proposed fix from the new government, led by the farmer citizen movement. Their plan seems pretty common sense. Just raise that pigeon dropping limit by 200 times to get construction going again, and then focus on reducing the country's total emissions over the long run. But then you have the legal reality, which is a classic catch-22. The courts and experts are clear, you can only raise that limit after you have proof that nature is actually improving. And right now, the government's plan just doesn't have the hard, binding commitments needed to guarantee those emission cuts. So this all brings us to the unavoidable, hard truth of the situation. Because when you really look at both the ecological problem and the legal problem the country built for itself, they both point to the exact same conclusion. It seems the only way forward, the only way to satisfy the courts and get the country moving again, and the only way to actually save the very nature that started this whole mess, is to significantly, drastically reduce the total amount of nitrogen being pumped into the environment. Okay, so if you have to reduce total nitrogen, where is it all coming from? Well, let's just look at the data. When you break down the sources of nitrogen landing in Dutch nature reserves, it looks like this. About 15% comes from foreign sources, around 10% from transport and industry, and a really staggering 75% comes from agriculture. And this gets to the absolute core of the dilemma. It's really not about pointing fingers or blaming farmers, who, for their part, feel like they're just producing food and following the rules. This is just about simple math. If you need to make massive reductions, you have to focus on the single largest source. There's really no way around it. All of which leaves the Netherlands facing a fundamental and, frankly, a deeply uncomfortable question. For decades, the country has tried to have it all in a very small space. Massive agriculture, huge industry, a dense population, and protected nature. But now, the math and the law are both screaming that it's just not possible anymore. So it all boils down to this. When a nation's entire way of life conflicts with nature's basic survival, what has to give?